Two men, both running to be the next president of Colombia. Both swear up and down that they are tough, that they are clean, that they are the answer to a country that is exhausted. And both of them have a little problem with the company they keep. One of them is a defense lawyer who has spent his career representing mobsters, paramilitaries, and at least one alleged frontman for the Maduro regime over in Venezuela. And he tells you those relationships were strictly professional. The other one fought to spring a FARC commander out of a maximum security holding cell, and he tells you that relationship was strictly professional too. One says, I only knew the narco because I was his attorney. The other says, I only knew the guerrilla because I was a peace negotiator. Same sentence, opposite ends of the political spectrum. Welcome to the strangest mirror in Colombian politics. This Sunday, June 21st, Colombians go back to the polls for the runoff. On May 31st, in the first round, the right's Abelardo de la Espriella came in first with about 43.7% of the vote. The left's Iván Cepeda came in second with about 40.9%. Nobody else is left. It's just these two. And whoever wins walks into the Casa de Nariño on August 7th. I'm your host, Lauren Moss, for Colombia Business News, and today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take these two men apart. Figuratively, of course, who they are, where they came from, and the pros and the cons of each one from my point of view. And I'll tell you right now, so there's no confusing the issue or the purpose here. I'm not endorsing anybody. I'm pro-business, I'm anti-crime, and I'm anti-communist, but I am not Colombian, and I don't pretend to tell them how to vote. So I'm going to do my level best to be fair to both, because both of these men have serious problems, and you deserve to hear it laid out straight. So let's get into it. Let's start with Abelardo de la Espriella, nickname El Tigre, which he, I think, picked for himself. Maybe somebody else named him, but he goes by El Tigre. He likes that. And maybe because Abelardo de la Espriella is a lot of syllables, so El Tigre is easier. But interestingly, because there's no tigers in Colombia, except for maybe out there at the zoo, like out there at Hacienda Nápoles. Colombia has full of jaguars, though. But anyway, he's the tiger. So let's just go with that. But he has a slight lead in the polls. I think something like 8 points I saw in the show prep. And picture this, because it's real. The lights go yellow, blue, and red. Videos of tigers, lots of tigers play on the screen. Smoke machines fire. Then Colombian national anthem plays. And then out he comes surrounded by 6 bodyguards wearing a bulletproof vest over his clothes. And he says, Aquí está tu tigre. Here's your tiger, roaring and biting. That's not a parody, and this is the actual campaign event and the crowd starts chanting, Ponle la raya al tigre, or put the stripe on the tiger, and it's a show, and he's disciplined about running that show the exact same way every single time. Now, where does this guy come from? According to the investigative outlet La Silla Vacía, their deep profile of him, and I'm leaning quite a bit on their reporting here. That's a great Colombian investigative reporting journal. They have a website, and if you are fluent in Spanish, I highly recommend it. But according to them, Abelardo was born in Bogota in 1978, but he grew up in Sahagún and Monteria, up in Córdoba, on the Caribbean side. His mother calls the family small town rich, riquitos del pueblo. A respected name, a comfortable life, political connections, but not the rosca, not the Bogota elite, and not one of the great national fortunes that you have in Colombia. His father was a Liberal Party congressman who ran unsuccessfully for governor and Senate, and who was an early backer of Álvaro Uribe up in Córdoba back in 2001. When Uribe got to the presidency, he made Abelardo's father a notary. So a notary public in Colombia is not like in the U.S. where it's the guy who stamps your document, but it's kind of like the registrar's office, and it's a private business that you run with a government, kind of like how in England, where like the Queen says, okay, you're going to be the royal leather maker, and so you carry out a public function, but you're a private entity. So if you have documents like a marriage certificate, or if you're going to go and like buy or sell a house, then the transaction takes place at the notary, and then the documents, actually the notary is responsible then for maintaining those documents. So that's where the long relationship between the De La Espriella family and the Uribe family starts. So from the time he was a little kid, Abelardo wanted to be seen. This is a guy who, according to his own family, sang opera in the bathroom, had a kids' radio program his dad set up, got himself onto regional TV as a teenager, and told his grandmother he'd one day fly her to Miami and pick her up in a limousine. He went to law school at the Sergio Arboleda University in Bogota, not an academic powerhouse, but a real breeding ground for the Colombian right. And while he was a student, he was already hustling, selling whiskey and perfume, clothes, even emeralds on consignment, staying at the Waldorf Astoria in New York at 19 years old. So the man has always been building a legend about himself. But here's the part that matters for this election, and it's the part that he doesn't lead with on stage. De La Espriella made his name as a defense lawyer, and not for choir boys. His client list reads like a Rouges gallery. Politicians tied to paramilitary groups, the Nule brothers from the big Carrusel de Contratos contracting scandal in Bogota, the pyramid scheme operator David Murcia of DMG, the disgraced Constitutional Court magistrate Jorge Pretelt, and this is the big one, Alex Saab, the man the United States accused of being a front man for Nicolas Maduro. He even, early on, did legal and PR work around the paramilitary demobilization at Santa Fe de Ralito through an NGO that he ran when he was just 26 years old. His childhood friend from back in Cordoba is Salvatore Mancuso, that paramilitary super mega gangster. I guess they go back to kids. Now, Abelardo will tell you, and it's a legitimate argument, that every defendant has a right to a lawyer, and that defending an unpopular client is not the same as committing his client's crimes. Fair enough. We'll come back to that. After the lawyering came the brand. Abelardo built himself into a product. He launched a rum called Ron Defensor, the Defender, with the Vallenato star Silvestre Dangon. He launched a clothing line. He put out music. He wrote books. He had an atheist phase, and then about 6 years ago, a very public religious conversion, and now he's the God and family candidate, calling himself the Cyrus of Colombia. And he is, by his own design, a sybarite. Zegna suits from Italy every year, a mansion in Miami valued north of $5 million, a private plane, the whole production. A couple of facts to keep in your back pocket or your carriel for later. Carriel is the paisa purse, or paisa, but actually guys carry it. It's this really kind of well, it looks like a purse, but it's kind of, it's not feminine. If you go to like the Cafetero, if you go in like Colombia or Caldas or Risaralda, you'll see guys out in the country, not in the city, not people like going to work in an office, but out in the country, you'll see people walking around with these pretty elaborate things. They're carriels, very much an emblem of paisa culture. But anyway, so this guy, Abelardo, has never held elected office, not once. He ran for a Bogota City Council seat as a student in the 1990s. He lost, and he stayed out of electoral politics for almost 30 years. Second, he is a United States citizen and an Italian citizen and a Colombian citizen. Third, his running mate, his pick for vice president, is Jose Manuel Restrepo. And hold that name, because Restrepo is going to come up in a big way when we get to the pros and the cons. And so that's the man, a showman, a brand, a defense lawyer for the powerful, an outsider. Now, he has taken on, I think, a couple of pro bono cases, I'm sure more than a couple, but there are a couple of famous cases. There was a case where a woman was killed, I think, by like a jilted lover or something in a particularly gruesome way. And he represented her family and served sort of like a private prosecutor to make sure that this guy didn't get off and served maximum penalty. So it would not be fair to say, oh, he's only a defense lawyer for the powerful, because I'm sure that he has done not only pro bono work, but I would imagine his law firm has helped people in need. I don't know either way, but I don't want to be unfair is what I'm saying. But he's no outsider. Let's put it that way. Now, let's meet his opponent. If De La Espriella's story is about a man who wanted to be seen, Iván Cepeda's story is about a man shaped by a death. August 9th, 1994, a young Iván Cepeda takes a bus to the Javeriana University where he taught philosophy after letting his father leave the house first. On the way, he runs into ambulances, police cars, and a crowd around a bullet-riddled car. It was his father's car, Manuel Cepeda, a senator for the Patriotic Union, the Unión Patriótica. He had just been assassinated. And here's the detail that tells you everything about Iván Cepeda. He didn't collapse over the body. He pulled out of his jacket a column his father had written about another murdered activist, crossed the street to tell his wife, and then he turned and spoke to the journalist, composed one message, calling on the president and the courts to act. Years later, he said, "When my father was murdered, I already knew how I should act, what I should say." That moment made him. He took private grief and turned it into public political language. La Silla Vacía describes his whole way of doing politics as being organized around the truth of the victims. And I'd say that's exactly right. So who is he really? Iván Cepeda was born in 1962. His father was actually in prison at the time for interviewing a survivor of the army's bombing of Marquetalia, the peasant enclave that became the founding myth of the FARC. His parents, Manuel Cepeda and Yira Castro, were journalists, communists, and revolutionaries. Politics wasn't dinner table conversation in that house. It was the air they breathed. At 13, Iván was already in the communist youth. At 17, after his mother died, his father sent him behind the Iron Curtain to study philosophy in Sofia, Bulgaria. He came back in 1987, by his own account, disillusioned with Soviet Marxism and the hypocrisy and privilege he'd seen in the Communist Party over there. His father's assassination in 1994 was the turning point. The Patriotic Union, remember, was a political party born out of a peace process, a way for the FARC and the Communist Party to enter electoral politics, and it was then systematically exterminated. We're talking thousands of people assassinated. Iván channeled all of it. He created the Manuel Cepeda Foundation. He built memorial galleries with the families of the disappeared. He founded Movice, the movement of victims of state crimes. He pursued his father's case until the Colombian state was declared responsible and their Inter-American Court of Human Rights condemned the country. And then he found his great adversary, his nemesis, Álvaro Uribe. For Cepeda, Uribe is the symbol of the establishment that he believes must confess its responsibility for the paramilitarism and the killing of the left. He spent years pursuing Uribe, the prison visits in the United States to extradited paramilitaries, the 2014 debate in Congress, and that ultimately produced the witness tampering case that put the former president on trial. Cepeda became, as La Silla Vacía puts it, the leftist who succeeded in putting Uribe in the dock. That is the engine of his political career. He got to Congress in 2010, famously showing up with a bucket, a broom, and a mop, promising to clean up a Congress stained by parapolitics. So parapolitics in Colombia, parapolitico, is a term, and it's actually a crime. People go to jail for it. Where the Paraco, so you had the FARC and the ELN and those guys, and so then these people, mostly like landowners and ranchers and stuff, got together at the beginning, kind of as a vigilante group, at the beginning to protect themselves because the FARC was running around raiding them and stuff. And it started as a vigilante group, but it ended up getting taken over, as these things tend to, by like the most violent sociopathic elements. The same thing has happened in Mexico. So you have these vigilante self-defense groups, and then so like you might be somebody like, yeah, we need to defend our farm, and these FARC people are kidnapping my kids, and so you join, and you want to like protect yourself because the government isn't there doing its job. But then what happens is these groups, as they get organized, they get infiltrated or they morph into criminal elements. The peaceful people get pushed out, and then you end up with these groups that turn into basically mafias. And that's exactly what happened, for example, with the Clan del Golfo, the Gulf Clan in Colombia, where now they're just a mafia. They're not protecting anybody. They're extorting people. They still fight with the FARC and stuff like that, but they fight over control of drug routes and control over who gets to extort the townsfolk and these kinds of things. And so they also, back during their peak, let's say 15, 20 years ago, they made a concerted effort to infiltrate politics. And they would do this by either buying off politicians or supporting politicians who would ally with them or be sympathetic to them, or actually running their own candidates. And so a lot of politicians have been locked up for taking their money, for being allied with them. And it, for a while there, was really blatant. I mean, Cepeda was in Congress holding up a picture of his dad, and Mancuso and these guys, the same guy who's the pal with Abelardo, they're in Congress, and congressmen are taking pictures with them like they're getting their autographs, like they're fans. And these are like obvious mafia people. Now, it's not quite like that anymore. I mean, there still is going to be some of that stuff taking place in like secretly, because it's very illegal. But that's what parapolitics are in Colombia, parapolitica. Cepeda has been sitting there ever since, 4 terms, sitting mostly on the second committee, which is in the legislature, handles military promotions, security, foreign relations. And the thing to understand about his experience, and I'm going to come back to this, he's never governed anything. No city, no department, no ministry, no significant budget. His arena has been Congress as a kind of moral and judicial forum. So he's a crusader. And he was also the principal intellectual architect of Gustavo Petro, the current president's paz total, or total peace policy. In fact, Cepeda came up with the term. Now, his running mate is Ida Quilque. She's an indigenous NASA leader and senator. She herself is a victim of state violence. Her husband was shot by the Colombian military. I believe they were returning from a Minga. And a NASA is an ethnic group in Colombia. So in Canada, you say First Nations, or in the U.S., you might say Native Americans, even though they themselves call themselves American Indians. But of course, Colombia and much of Latin America, especially places like Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador, the indigenous never went away. Now, you have some people who are just out in society, and they might have mostly indigenous DNA, and you have like 3 broad main, I guess, like if you looked at it scientifically with DNA and that kind of thing, groups in Colombia, but you have like hundreds, if not, probably not 1,000, but you have hundreds of different little ethnicities and groups or tribes or whatever you want to call them. And some people will just live out in society, just like same thing in the U.S. Like you might be like Native American pure blood, but you just live in, I don't know, Rhode Island or something, and you're just living your life like everybody else. And then you'll have some people who live on reservations. Okay. And so in Colombia, and there are some significant differences, but you have people who just live like wherever they want to live and just live life however they want to live. And then you have people who ethnically identify and want to keep to the traditions and the ways, and they have reservations. Nobody's forced to live on them, but you have these Indian reservations or indigenous reservations. NASA is one of those communities, not NASA like the space program, but it's actually a community down here, just like you have the Embera, you have the Wayu, you have the Kogwi, you have the Arhuaco, and then you have all of these groups down in the Amazon. I mean, innumerable groups. And so Aida Quilque is from the NASA community. And so she and her husband, they were both activists, and they were organizing Minga. A Minga is kind of a sight to behold if you ever see one. So in Colombia, they'll get, and there's different motivations for it. They're usually angry at something. And so these groups will leave the reservation and they get on all these chivas, they get on these big buses, and like they have these big caravans, and they're like on top of the buses and hanging off the buses and cars and trucks and whatever. They get together and they bring these big caravans to wherever they want to go, usually Bogota, but they might go somewhere regional like Cali or Medellin, and they want to be heard. And sometimes you don't know what to expect, because sometimes it's peaceful and articulate. Sometimes it turns into quite a, I don't want to use the word riot, but it can get disorderly and turn into a mess sometimes. But anyway, she was, her life, the point is that her life has been dedicated to activism for various causes specific to indigenous Colombians. And, so she's his vice presidential pick, and now she's a senator. Because they get like special allocations, and so you get so many people from the different departments like Antioquia and Caldas and whatever, and then they have a separate representation and get a certain quota of elected seats for their communities. I don't know the details of how that works, but that's basically the principle. But one more thing that you need to know, because it's human and it's real, Iván Cepeda is in fragile health. He has beaten cancer twice, colon cancer in 2018, liver cancer treated in 2022, and people who have worked with him describe a worn body but an iron will. He's intellectually serious, sober, predictable, the opposite of Petro's chaos, the current president, who kind of rules by, he basically improvises and kind of makes things up as he goes along. And whether you like Cepeda's politics or not, he's no dingbat. Now, these are our two contenders. Let's get into the pros and cons, and this is where I'm going to give you my honest read. Okay. Let me make the case for De la Espriella, the genuine pros as I see them. 1, he promises to be tough on crime, both the organized guerrillas and ordinary street crime. After 4 years of watching armed groups roughly double in size under the total peace fiasco that the current administration has run, and Iván Cepeda is like the intellectual author of it, a lot of Colombians are hungry for exactly a crackdown. And I understand why. So these guerrilla groups are growing and flourishing. And places that were once safe to go in Colombia, I've been to Jamundí, I've been to Maicao, I've been to Valdivia, I've been to Ituango, I've been to these places that are just no longer exactly safe to go to. Things are actually getting worse. They're actually regressing. And you could look at the numbers to see that that's not just a sentiment or a gut feeling thing. The security situation in Colombia, especially in rural areas, is getting worse. 2, talking about Abelardo. He's pro-business and pro-investment, domestic and foreign. He says it, I believe he means it, and he's built his whole pitch on the idea that prosperity comes from the private sector, not the state. 3, he's pro-USA. Forgive my bias, but, I'm from the USA. And he promises to repair the relationship with Washington, which got badly damaged under Petro. And get this, he's actually a U.S. citizen himself. Whatever you think of that, it tells you which direction he's facing. 4, investor confidence. I think he'd bring it, and I think he'd likely work to repair Colombia's diminished credit rating, which matters enormously for what the country pays to borrow. 5, lower taxes. He supports them, and generally that's a good thing when it translates into genuinely fiscally prudent policy. That's the caveat. But the instinct, I think, is the right one. You can cut taxes too much, and then you have a mess where the government doesn't have the basic funds that it needs. You can also have taxes too high. But we'll see. At least he, let's say, kind of, if you paint with the broad brush, it sounds good. Okay. The devil's in the detail, of course, but we'll see. 6, and this is a big one for me. Jose Manuel Restrepo, his pick for vice president. I'm very impressed by this. Restrepo was both Minister of Commerce and Finance Minister in Iván Duque's cabinet, former President Iván Duque. And Restrepo did a good job, even when Duque himself did not. Restrepo has very few critics. He brings a level of intellectual seriousness and economic credibility to this ticket that honestly the candidate at the top doesn't project on his own. A credible technocrat, one heartbeat from the presidency, is a real asset. 7, he wants to shrink the bureaucracy. Now, Colombia's bureaucracy isn't as bloated as some other places in Latin America, but it can still be streamlined. And I'll tell you, in Colombia, the bigger problem than handing out sinecures, what the Dominicans call botellones, a botella is a bottle, so a botellón is a big bottle, but basically a big bottle that you suck from. So in the Dominican Republic, somebody, and this happens in a lot of countries, so somebody gets in the office and then he gives out all jobs to all his friends and families. You, a job for you, and you don't really do any work. You just go and like suck on this big bottle, this botellón. And Argentina under the Kirchner administration was very infamous for hiring a whole bunch of people to put them on the government payroll, not to do work, but to just buy votes, essentially. Okay. And it was fiscally irresponsible. And this happens, not to pick on those two countries, but it happens in a lot of places. But in Colombia, what is more common than that is mermelada. Mermelada means marmalade, okay, jelly. And that's spreading money around through nonsense, useless government contracts to friends and supporters. If he actually goes after that, good. So what happens in Colombia, there's a law. And right before elections, because it was so bad historically that people like to buy votes or to get people to supporters or whatever, they'll give you like a big government. They would just hand out contracts to friends and supporters to like pay back. So you might make a big political contribution, but then you're going to get your money back because the corrupt politician then gives you a nonsense contract to pay your contribution back from your donation, right? Or from your support. That's kind of, now it works to some level like that in a lot of democracies. You could argue that the U.S. has its own problem with that. And I would agree, not as blatant. It doesn't happen quite the same way as it does in a lot of developing countries, but it's actually getting worse, I think, back home in the U.S. I think that things are deteriorating, and hopefully these things go in cycle and we get to a nadir and then return to a zenith of let's say, political virtue. But we're right now a long way from that. So if Abelardo goes after that, then great. Now, 8, he's intelligent. Say what you want about him, about Abelardo. He is a very successful defense attorney, and he clearly knows jurisprudence and legal procedure. So he's no dummy. He's made a successful career navigating for his clients the very complex Colombian legal system. You have 3 different Supreme Courts in Colombia, okay? And I've explained that on other episodes before. But that's he's no dummy, okay? 9, private property for regular people. He says he wants to promote home ownership, not just for the wealthy, but for people of modest means. The newspaper El País reports he's got a plan for below market 30-year mortgages. And if that's real and it works, that's a genuinely good aspirational idea. One of the reasons that home ownership is so high in a place like the United States compared to, for example, Germany, or really most of Europe, is that in the U.S. you can get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage and lock in your terms. And so it's relatively easy to buy a house. Now in Colombia, I mean, you need to have money, but it's pretty. It's not difficult to buy real estate, and even if you're a foreigner, Colombia is not only does not put up a lot of obstacles to you, but Colombia, which is a very virtuous thing, treats foreigners legally the same way as they treat Colombia. So if you're a foreigner and you invest in Colombia, you buy real estate, you're not at any kind of legal disadvantage compared to a local person. And obviously, I think that's a plus. Peruvian author Hernando de Soto, I admire him a lot. He wrote a book called The Mystery of Capital, one of my lifelong favorites. I read it right about the year 2000. I can remember because I remember where I was living at the time, and I was reading that book, and I can see myself in my bedroom at that particular place. And so I know it was around 2000, but he wrote this book called The Mystery of Capital, and it's still available. It's still timely. And he explains how real asset ownership by the masses is what leads to true economic progress in a country. I mean, there's other ingredients as well, but it's a key component to formalizing the economy and bringing more people into true participation. When you actually own assets, you can extract value from them, leave them to descendants, and build real wealth. 10, healthcare. Abelardo promises to fix the EPS system, Entidad Promotora de Salud. And EPS is it's not quite the same thing, but like a health insurance provider. So you have an EPS and your employer pays the EPS, and there are different ones. So you can choose what EPS you want. I have Sura. There's different ones you can pick and in different regions of the country. So you pay premiums to the EPS, your employer pays premiums to the EPS, and then when you get sick or something, the EPS is responsible for paying the doctors and the hospitals, and I think, the dentist too, actually, and, to take care of you. Now, there is private insurance, even though the EPS, these entities are private companies for the most part. You can then go and buy private insurance on top of the EPS, which is different. It's a whole different level, but the basic level of care is provided by the EPS system. Okay. Petro, the current president, is trying to get rid of it. He wants to eliminate it, and he wants to go to a single payer government model where you're beholden to the national government for your health care. But Abelardo promises to fix the EPS system, root out corruption, and install strict financial oversight rather than blow it up. And to me, this sounds a lot better than counting on the government, which I think would be disastrous. Now, the government has not shown the organizational competence to run. You go out into areas and there's no security, there's no police, even where you need them. And that's why you have these rebel groups and these Paraco mafias, and there's no police or military or anybody to be found. And to think that they're going to be able to send doctors into areas where they can't even secure the areas, I think is a bit overly optimistic. And, another thing, President Petro just put the indicted former mayor of Medellin, Daniel Quintero, in charge of overseeing the EPS. And Quintero is accused of looting the city of Medellin's coffers. So that should be a warning to anybody who wants to hand this whole system over to the state. Right now, maybe you've got a couple of EPS providers that are insolvent. Okay. But what happens when the national government can't pay the health providers and the entire system collapses? Patching the system beats nationalizing it, from my point of view. And that's not just as some naive foreigner who doesn't know what he's talking about. I've been a member of and payer into the EPS system for 13 years now, I think. So I'm what do they say? I'm not just the spokesman. I'm a client, or a patient, or whatever you want to say. I have my EPS is Sura, and I'm quite happy with them. Anyway. 11, accountability for teachers. He wants performance evaluations. I think that's reasonable. In any kind of job, when I have clients, they evaluate my performance as a provider. I have employees. I evaluate their performance. And even though I'm sure that FECODE, which is the biggest national teachers union, will fiercely oppose it. 12, nationwide internet connectivity. This is really important. Abelardo wants to expand it into rural and underserved regions, and that is critical for a country with a huge gap between rural and urban, rich and poor, as Colombia has. Connectivity remains an obstacle. I visited schools like I have a friend who's a member of the YU indigenous community, and up in La Guajira, and she took me to visit some remote and isolated schools. And you had teachers who were willing to teach. You have students who were willing to learn, but there was not even cellular connectivity, let alone internet connectivity. There was none. Okay. They were completely disconnected. They didn't have, they had electricity from like the local, like there's a house out in the schoolyard or across the schoolyard, and they get electricity from that. But they had no connectivity, internet, no computers, no internet, not even for your phone. Okay, so in Colombia, well, really anywhere, connectivity means opportunity. And so there you go. That's a real list. That's not, that's more than nothing. And there's a coherent pro-growth, pro-security program in there. But let me expose the other side. So let's look at the other side of the ledger. And there's a lot here to consider. So one, the first one that is kind of alarming is the Bukele worship. And he's an open admirer of El Salvador President Nayib Bukele. And look, Bukele has unquestionably reduced crime in El Salvador, and he deserves accolades for that. But he also has clear dictatorial tendencies and shows no sign of ever willingly leaving power. They even sort of look alike. And I swear, De La Espriella seems to cut his hair like Bukele. And maybe that's a coincidence, but here's what's not a coincidence. Bukele is no friend to a free and vigorous press. And De La Espriella is notoriously thin-skinned. He uses the courts to slap people who annoy him. For those who don't know the term, a slap, S-L-A-P-P, is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's when a rich person or an organization or a government sues somebody to force them to burn exorbitant amounts of money and time defending themselves. Even when the case has no merit, it can bankrupt you, consume you with stress, or eat up so much of your time that you can't do your actual job. And this isn't hypothetical with him. La Cia Vacía documented dozens of these civil suits and criminal complaints, dozens against journalists, and several reporters admit they've ended up censoring themselves. And that should worry anybody who cares about press freedom. 2, he may turn out to be soft on crime, especially organized crime. And I know that sounds backwards for the iron fist guy, so stay with me. He's made a career out of defending mobsters, paracos, and corrupt people. The Nule family, Carrusel de Contratos. Alex Saab, super mega criminal mastermind for Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. He's in jail now in the U.S. He's childhood friends with the notorious paramilitary chief Salvatore Mancuso. That's not his real name. Is like something long, I forget. But they have these nom de guerres. They pick on these names. So this guy, he's not even Italian as far as I know, but he decides that's a cool sounding name. It is kind of a cool sounding name, Salvatore Mancuso, and he's this big super mafia kingpin guy, just like he's also been linked to a paramilitary actor known as Boliche. And Boliche is Jorge Luis Hernandez Villazon, who is on trial right now in the United States for narco trafficking. Now, De La Espriella denies any connection with Boliche and says he only knows him through his work as a criminal defense attorney. Fine. But it's a fair question, totally fair question to ask. How tough are you really going to be on your friends and your former clients? That's not a cheap shot. That's just a reasonable thing to want answered. Maybe we'll see. Who knows? 3, I don't see a plan for the poor. I've looked and I don't see anything in his platform that tells me he has a comprehensive plan or honestly even a lot of compassion for the underprivileged and the people without access to opportunity, especially in the remote areas, the Pacific coast, the rural zones, the Atlantic coast. Maybe he has one and I just haven't heard it. Maybe he inside has a big thumping heart and has really a comprehensive plan of how he's going to lift people out of poverty. But it doesn't seem to be a major part of his platform, or at least I haven't heard it so far. So that's a concern for me. Number 4, he seems inconsistent. This guy craves attention. He was a singer with records out. He launched a clothing line. He launched a rum called Ron Defensor. And then all of a sudden he finds Jesus, and he becomes the God and family candidate. Maybe it's sincere, but forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of a conversion that lines up so neatly with the presidential run. 5, the peace accords. He's pledged not to implement the 2016 peace accords, the ones former President Juan Manuel Santos won the Nobel Prize for. Now, the last 2 presidents didn't do a great job implementing them either, so let's be fair about that. But my main concern is simple. The people who genuinely laid down their arms need to be protected. You don't want to give the next generation a reason to think that demobilizing gets you killed. If you think that it's safer to stay out there in the jungle being the FARC or being the ELN or being the AUC or being the Caparapos, that's actually a name of an illegal group here in Colombia, or the EPLs or whoever, then it's like this is what happened to the Unión Patriótica, to that party, because back when they tried it back in the 80s, like some people who were in the FARC said, okay, we'll stop shooting people and stuff and come and try to be politicians. And there were something like 4,000 of them. They just got slaughtered. They got assassinated. They got just wiped out, systematically exterminated. And so it basically said that we can't trust you to come and do this. So we're safer staying up in the mountains or down in the jungles. And that might not be a smart move. But anyway, he's pledged he doesn't want to have anything to do with the 2016 peace accords that Santos negotiated. Along those same lines, the HEP or JEP, Jurisdicción, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the Jurisdicción Especial de Paz. Abelardo wants to get rid of it. He claims that it is a political tool and it's not delivering real justice. I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough details about the HEP to tell you flatly whether he's right or wrong. I tend to be a little bit skeptical of his claim that it's just a political tool. It was this entity put into place out of the 2016 peace accords, kind of similar to like they had a Truth Commission in South Africa, and I think they did something similar in Rwanda as well. Of course, those two countries have different histories and different circumstances, but it's kind of like come and admit your crimes and apologize. It's supposed to give some kind of alternative restorative justice, but it's not my main area of focus as a journalist. I mean, I'm aware of it, and of course, and I read the articles about it, but I'm not going to go too deep into that because I'm not competent enough just to be blunt. And so my hunch is that it has done some good and maybe could use some improvement. I don't know if getting rid of it is the right way to go. So I'm skeptical of that claim. Anyway, 7, Abelardo has never held any political office, so we don't have anything at all to go on. And that is the risk of the unknown. Does he turn out to be a statesman, or is he a caudillo wannabe? A caudillo is a term for like a strongman, like a strongman dictator, like a Trujillo, or you could say Fidel Castro or Pinochet in Chile. It's not just right or left wing, but it's like this strongman dictator type. We don't know. Maybe this guy is like this great Democrat and statesman, and he's going to be like up there in the future with statues like Simón Bolívar and General Santander. We'll see. 8, the persona. His public identity is kind of obnoxious, and I don't know the man personally, but he projects himself as a bit of a gomelo. And that's Colombian slang for like a stuck-up rich kid. I think back home they're calling them chads now. This guy who he sees himself as like this preppy guy who thinks he's cool, had rich parents or something. He runs around, being a snob. That's what a gomelo is. It's kind of an insult. Like people don't call themselves that, okay? But other people who don't like you call you that. But that's sort of the persona that he has projected. But I have to be careful here because a lot of people cultivate a public persona that has nothing to do with their real character, for better or for worse. And I'll give you an example. My dad was a politician when I was a kid, but really up until I was about 30, I think. And he had this public persona of this angry man. I think even one of the like newspapers or the magazines, it was like a magazine feature back home in my home city, and they called him the angry man. And I mean, he could get angry, but he sort of cultivated this persona, this public persona. But in like, if you knew him privately as a person, he wasn't really like that. It was kind of this theater, and he studied theater in college. Okay, so he was conscious about what he was doing, and he was pretty, for the most part, a nice guy. And nobody's perfect. But people would be scared of him, and they were like, "Man, I bet your dad is really strict." And I was like, "Not really. I mean, he wasn't like a hippie, he lax, like go smoke pot in the bathroom or anything like that. But he was, pretty." Like it was, he was kind of laid back, and personally, he was a pretty nice guy. He was jovial. He was quite a thespian. But I bring that up to say that you have to be careful. A lot of times you might see either politicians or like celebrities, and in public, they cultivate this, and their publicists do this too. They cultivate this image of like hell, Bill Cosby. He was like America's dad. Remember that? Now it turns out he's like a sex fiend. He's locked. Isn't he in jail, or did they let him out of jail because he's old? But he was convicted. Okay, he's like this super abuser. And so there's the image of the guy, the dad making jello, and then there's this guy who's out there violating people and causing all these problems. And so my point in all that is that you can't always what somebody's public persona is may be manufactured for their own reason. So this whole tigre thing, to me personally, it's kind of corny. But a lot of people, it gets them riled up. People are tired of all this violence, and people are tired of all this crime and these FARC and dissidents and ELN guerrillas running around. And when somebody comes and they're like, I'm going to be fierce, I'm going to be tough, people are tired of getting their purses snatched and their iPhones stolen. My brother-in-law had his camera stolen. Okay, and then these court systems, they turn around and let the suspect out so quickly that the suspects just tell you, if you snitch on me, I'm going to come back and get you. There was a case where a guy down in Medellin just last week was shooting at police officers. They call them encapuchados, which means you have a hood on your head. These like thugs go and disrupt university campuses, mostly public universities like the National University in Bogota, or this was at University of Antioquia. And they caught this guy, and this guy they caught him with the gun, and they caught him with like all this stuff in his house, like all this stuff that he was using. And rather than, he deserves a fair trial, but the judge the judge just let him out like as soon as they caught him. And he like escapes because now he's gone. They can't find him because he knew that they were on to him, and he had like these ELN banners and stuff. So now he's probably out there in the jungle with the ELN somewhere. He's broke camp. Okay. So people are tired of this kind of stuff like that. People are tired of this disorder. And so I can understand where you would create this persona about you're going to be this tough guy and you're going to be this God and family guy against these communist people who are taking over the country. So I sort of get it. Okay. So he's creating this persona, but he's asking us to vote on this public persona. And, it kind of is, now I don't think like most people, and I learned that a long time ago, but so something might be corny or hokey to me, but, the people dig it. And again, it's not for me to say. I'm here to analyze and observe, but it's for the Colombians to decide. So we'll see. Now, that's the De La Espriella ledger, and there's a real pro column and there's a real con column. So now let's do the same for Iván Cepeda. And let me make an honest case for him. So want to be fair and balanced here. And so one, I think that the first thing that stands out is he'll focus on the marginalized. And I do believe that he would do that if he wins the election. He will very likely put real attention on the underprivileged and the forgotten parts of the country. And the map backs this up. He actually carried the entire Pacific coast in the first round and the forested borders with Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. He carried most of the Atlantic provinces too, the exception being Antioquia, which has a little bit of Caribbean coastline, but really concentrates its population way south down by Medellin. And let's be honest, most of that Atlantic coast outside of Barranquilla and the touristy parts of Cartagena has suffered from corruption and a chronic lack of investment for generations. So somebody paying attention to these places is not a bad thing. Sometimes I think that Colombia reminds me of like the movie The Hunger Games, where you have District 1 and District 2, and it's like Medellin and Bogota, where you can have a world-class lifestyle. I mean, Medellin is like now this big international luxury destination. Bogota, obviously, where all the diplomats are, and a lot of companies and wealth is headquartered there. And you can live as well as you can live anywhere in the world as far as quality of life, except for the traffic. Bogota, the traffic is it's a different story. But then you have these areas out there where they're just like, there's no investment, there is no security. They're not building roads or maintaining roads, or people don't have access, like I mentioned, to education. I told you about up there in the YU community where there's no connectivity. During the Duque administration, at least they did try to have this program where they were going to install internet in all these rural areas, satellite internet. And these bastards ran off with... They got the contract, and the Minister of Telecommunications gave them the deposit, which was a bunch of money because it was a huge contract. And the scammers who won the contract first of all, they won it with fake documents. Like they said they had this insurance that they never even had. And they went off and spent the money buying Toyota luxury trucks and condos in Miami, literally. Just like they say in Spanish, sin vergüenza. Like they were shameless. They didn't even, it wasn't like they were like, we'll be subtle about this and we'll like run off with like shave a little bit of the top, or, 5 or 10%. No, they like took all the money. It's like something a kid would do and ran off. Like, I don't know, like, dude, you're going to get caught. And so like, then, a few months later they said, okay, where's the satellite? Like, let's look at your progress. You have a contract. Okay, let's look at the report. And like, they're like, oh, like they just didn't show up. They broke camp. They were gone. Now they're caught. And so the one main guy, and we wrote about this in Finance Colombia, the ringleader was locked up, but a judge let him out. And I think he might be on the lam now. And the judge is under investigation for corruption, thinking that she may have, I think it's a she, it might be a he, but I'm pretty sure it's a she going from memory, might have been bribed to, think up a reason to let him out of jail. But there is there's a vast difference between the rich regions of Colombia and the poorer regions of Colombia when it comes to things like infrastructure, attention, access to opportunity. And I have no doubt that Cepeda would make that a pillar of his administration, and that's a good thing. Number two, he's consistent and predictable. Cepeda has a long political career and a coherent, stable ideology. Now, I may not agree with that ideology, and you'll hear about that in the cons, but it's very hard to call the man unpredictable. You know what you're getting with him, and in politics, that's worth something. Number three, the peace accords. He will try to actually implement Santos's 2016 peace accords. Hopefully it's not too late. That pact has a lot of flaws, and it lacked real commitment from both the current Gustavo Petro administration. Well, I think they may have been committed, but just they're not very good at executing on anything. But certainly the last administration, Iván Duque, had no interest in implementing that. And if it can be resuscitated or revived or saved, then Cepeda would be committed to that. He was a big part of that in the peace negotiations, actually himself. And even though he was part of the government delegation you could say that he argued almost more on the side of the rebels instead of, for the government. But that's a matter of opinion. And that peace process, the 2016 peace accords, did demobilize thousands of guerrilla fighters, criminals and terrorists who are no longer in the bush hassling or oppressing and blowing up people. And pushing to finish that work honestly has value, I believe. Number 4, to be fair, he is certainly more competent than his ally currently in office. He's certainly more intelligent and more disciplined than Gustavo Petro. Think about how Petro has governed. He was unable to push through much of his agenda, and he ran the Casa de Nariño, that's the Colombian White House, like a reality show. People coming and going, constant scheming. Gustavo Petro has cycled more than 60 different ministers through 19 ministries in less than 4 years. How do you get anything done when you're swapping in a new minister roughly every 3 weeks? If Cepeda wins, I do not think we'll see the same level of chaos and palace intrigue like those shows, Downton Abbey. I don't even know what that show was about. Some old people in England, but House of Cards or Game of Thrones and these kind of reality shows. Casa de las Famosas, a reality show in Colombia. Shark Tank. I don't know. And here's the kicker, though. Cepeda would have the largest block of support in Congress, so he'd actually be more successful at moving his agenda. Now, Abelardo has no political machinery in Congress. He doesn't really have a political party outside of himself. He may be allied with parties like certainly Centro Democrático. They've already come out in support of him. That's Uribe's party. Cambio Radical, I think, has already said that they would support him. But Cepeda has a whole block. I think he has something like 30 legislators in the House of Representatives that are from his political movement. And he would be coming to the presidency from the Senate, so he really knows how things operate there. He's a Senate veteran, and he knows how the machinery works. And credit where credit's due. He doesn't stand up in cabinet meetings inventing his own quantum physics like Gustavo Petro did. We have a cool video on that. You think that somebody's, I'm not insulting the man. I'm just reporting he actually did this. And that's a low bar, but Petro keeps walking under it and Cepeda clears it, at least when it comes to efficacy. Okay. And 5, he has a real commitment, I think, to the victims of violence in Colombia. Whatever else you say about the man, that commitment to victims is genuine. He himself sees himself as a victim of the violence. Well, obviously they assassinated his father, and that has been the through line of his entire life, and that certainly counts for something. So that's the case for Cepeda. Now, and this is where we will talk about my concerns from my point of view and my analysis, and there are quite a few of them. So, the cons of Iván Cepeda. Buckle up. 1, he's got shady friends too. Just like I talked about Abelardo's shady friends. Cepeda, he was close to the Colombian Chavista Senator Piedad Cordoba. Now, some people might like her and see her as like an activist and this and that. But didn't her brother go to jail for narcotics, I believe? And she has been caught being for her ties with the FARC. And just like Abelardo says his contacts with Boliche were purely professional, Cepeda says his ties to the FARC commander Raul Reyes were purely in his role as a peace negotiator. Oh, but Cepeda went further than that. The FARC commander Jesus Santrich, and I remember this, was in the Huscal. He was locked up and ready to be shipped off. This is a bad guy. Okay, he's a murderer. He was locked off and ready to be shipped off to the United States on drug trafficking charges. And Cepeda worked fiercely to get him sprung from the Fiscalia's bunker. The Fiscalia is the Attorney General in Colombia, and they have their own, they call it the bunker, and there's like more than one, but it's like where they lock up suspects. Now, eventually when you're convicted, you go off to, prison. but the Fiscalia, the Attorney General, has a place to lock you up and hold you themselves. And it's pretty secure. If you saw it, it's actually the one in Bogota is near the U.S. Embassy, like on the way out to the airport on El Dorado. The one in Colombia, the one in Medellin is up near the Terminal del Norte, the bus terminal. That's where the Fiscalia, the bunker is in Medellin. And so Cepeda works to spring. He was acting kind of like his defense attorney. He's like, no, this guy he's a peace negotiator. That's what it was. Cepeda says that this guy is a peace negotiator. I don't know if it's gullible or it's intentional. So what does Santos do once he's out of the Huscao, out of the jail? He runs off to Venezuela, crosses the Venezuela border, and restarted the FARC dissident group called the Segunda Marquetalia. Now, Marquetalia is this place, this little town out in the middle of nowhere, where like back years, in the 60s, I think, or 60s. So the FARC, they were going to go out there, like when the FARC was like this new thing, and they were going to make their own little utopia community out in the middle of nowhere, like you see some cults do in the U.S. and other places. But they were going to go out here, and then the government came and attacked them, and mostly, like a lot of just people who lived there who didn't have anything to do with the FARC ended up dying. The government attack failed, and so that Marquetalia, which is a place, is like part of the FARC's legendary origin story now. Okay, so they named, so Santrich, who's this murderous bad guy that Cepeda springs out of the joint, runs off to Venezuela where they can't get him and restarts basically restarting the FARC. But the official FARC, quit under the peace plan or whatever. So now this guy is like, I'm going to restart the FARC, and they're called Segunda Marquetalia. And they're out there right now running around killing people and hassling people and kidnapping people and growing and exporting drugs. Right now, they had him in the jail, and Cepeda gets him out. So the part I think that lands like a gut punch for a lot of Colombians beyond that, and that's a lot to go beyond, but that same group that Santos starts, Segunda Marquetalia, is the group that Colombian prosecutors have now linked to the assassination of presidential candidate Senator Miguel Uribe Turbay, who was just shot in Bogota last year, in June of last year, so a year ago, and died in August. And so it was the Segunda Marquetalia who allegedly gave the order to rub him out. And I want to be careful and fair. That is an attribution by the Colombian prosecutor's office right now. And some analysts, for example, like Inside Crime, that's another great publication that if you're interested in these kinds of things, you should follow, insidecrime.org. But they've noted that the public evidence, at least what's been released, because maybe there's a pile of evidence, but they don't just release everything out to the public right away. But Inside Crime says that the public evidence is thin. They're not saying that it's not correct or not true, but they haven't seen enough to say, yeah, they did it. And so maybe we shouldn't treat it as a settled fact. But the chain, Cepeda helps free Santrich. Santrich restarts the Segunda Marquetalia, the FARC dissidents. The Segunda Marquetalia gets tied to a magnicidio when you kill a public figure or a leader. And that's a heavy thing to carry into a presidential race. So if that's what he's doing in the Senate, you have to ask, what will it be like when he actually has the executive branch as well? And, another thing, Cepeda's own father was the Secretary General of the Colombian Communist Party. We'll come back to that because it cuts more than one way. So now maybe you're a commie and you're like, yeah, comrade, you like communism, stuff like that. It's not my thing. So, that's you're biased. Okay, I'm biased. I don't like communism. All right, you got me. Number two, he's soft on the guerrillas. I just got finished explaining to you about Jesus Santos. Jesus is the pronunciation like for Jesus, like it was spelled like Jesus. So it was like the bad guy named Jesus. Go figure. But anyway, Cepeda has a proven track record of being soft on the FARC, soft on the ELN, soft on armed groups generally. He's one of the architects of Petro's failed paz total, that's total peace. And under that nurturing approach, these groups have flourished. And I think they'd almost certainly keep blossoming under a Cepeda administration. He seems committed to giving them a good talking to rather than locking them up. So he'll give them, and he seems to see them more as victims. Oh, they're, those poor victims. I'm a victim of society. These guys out there killing everybody, robbing banks and liquor stores. He's like, I'm a victim of society. You're a criminal. But he sees these groups as victims of state violence rather than as the kidnappers, narco traffickers, and extortionists and terrorists that they are. Investigative publication La Silla Vacía's own reporting, that means the empty chair, by the way, in Spanish, La Silla Vacía, and it comes from they were going to interview some politician, I think it might have been Uribe, I don't remember, and the guy didn't show up or he wouldn't come or whatever, and so they just left the chair there in the debate or whatever, to emphasize, look, these, I don't know if they were calling him a coward or whatever, but so they named their publication after that little tidbit there. And they're not a right-wing outlet. They do a pretty good job. In fact, they probably get accused more of being on the left than on the right. But I think that they're just doing their job, trying to be honest, investigative reporters and calling it as they see it. That's my opinion. And I have a lot of, I don't know them. I've never met them, but I have a lot of respect for them. So if you read Spanish, certainly subscribe to and check out La Silla Vacía. But their investigation concluded that Cepeda bears a real political responsibility for the failure of total peace, paz total, that he pushed a negotiation model that was too ambitious, legally ambiguous, and weak in the face of armed groups. When the violence comes from the state, Cepeda sees structure and systemic responsibility. When it comes from the guerrillas, he tends to see context, sabotage, and a chance for peace. That blind spot is the whole arepa. Okay, that's like, dude, like everybody's a victim of state violence, but these guys are out there extorting people, they kidnap your kids. My brother-in-laws, when they were kids, my mother-in-law was afraid that they're Colombian. So they lived out in the mountains too. But she was afraid that the FARC was going to come and get them and take them away and make them be child soldiers. So this is not a concept or not something you see on a documentary. This is real. But, they're victims of oppression. But then if like the police go, and yeah, there's bad cops and there's bad military, but when they do their job, it's like, it's 100% always impression. It's like that. I remember I saw this graffiti here in Colombia, and I'm so innocent, I didn't know. So it said, it was when they were having these riots during the last administration, and they were putting up, they were graffitiing ACAB, and I've seen it like in the U.S. and Europe too, and I had no idea what it means. I mean, I'm not a graffiti guy. I didn't hang out with those crowds, when I was younger, but I was like out trying to party and like go to, chase girls. I wasn't out there rioting or graffitiing or nothing. But I said, what is this ACAB? And I knew this anarchist guy, he's a real, like if you ask him, what is your political thing? He said, I'm an anarchist. And he knew, because he likes all that kind of stuff. That's his circle. So he explained that ACAB means all cops are bastards. And I know that now, but I didn't learn that until 4 or 5 years ago. But anyway, it almost seems like Cepeda might have this idea. So that whatever they do, well, they shot somebody. Yeah, well, the guy was taking hostages, in the store. Well, he's a victim, and I remember back in the 80s in the U.S., you had a lot of these soft on crime politicians, and things probably went too far the other way. Or even right now, we can look in places like, and of course, it's a different situation, but a coddling attitude towards criminals leads to more criminality, and that seems to be the case. Now, number 3, his health, Cepeda's health, and his vice president. And this is a delicate topic, but it is a real one and should not be dodged. Iván Cepeda has fragile health. He's had cancer twice already. He's 63, colon cancer in 2018, and liver cancer treated in 2022. And some of you will remember that the late Rodolfo Hernandez, who lost to Gustavo Petro in 2022. So he would have been the president now if he won. But he died in 2024, 2 years ago, of cancer, right after what would have been shortly into his term. He also had liver and colon cancer. So this is not a hypothetical risk. And people, by the way, liver cancer is like a little bit different, but go and get your blood test regularly done. Take care of your health, people. And colon cancer, make sure you get, if you're at the age where it makes sense, a colonoscopy on a regular basis. Talk to your doctor about that. But this is a serious thing. And look, both of these people, the current presidential candidate has already survived colon cancer. The person that the current president defeated also died of colon cancer. Okay, so let's take this moment to say, go and get yourself checked out. If Cepeda didn't make it through his term, then his vice president, Aida Quilque, would take over. Quilque, I believe is how you pronounce it. Now, Quilque has a career as an indigenous leader from the NASA community, a Minga organizer, and most recently as a senator. And her whole career has centered on those issues. So what she would do about monetary policy, foreign affairs, or national security is a complete unknown. But I mean this when I say you never know. People chuckled when Petro picked Francia Marquez to be his running mate. And some people were just racist and didn't like her because she's Afro-Colombian. And again, like I explained about indigenous, to be Afro-Colombian doesn't just mean you have that phenotype, or that you have DNA with ancestry from Africans. Probably the majority of Colombians have that. But there are groups in Colombia that, just like indigenous people, they go and live off and kind of have their own culture outside of like the mainstream Latin culture. For example, you guys may have seen my documentary, and if you haven't, I invite you to watch it. We have English versions and Spanish versions on San Basilio de Palenque and the Palenqueros. So the Palenqueros are Colombians. They have their town, San Basilio de Palenque, which is about an hour away from Cartagena. And they're Colombians, and they're proud Colombians, but they have their own distinct language that linguists or anthropologists have studied, and goes back to somewhere near Angola in Africa. And there's a whole story. We've already kind of covered that. So check out my documentary. But they're happy. They're proud Colombians. They speak Spanish, but at home and in their community, they have their own distinct language and culture. And so there are groups like this, whether they're indigenous or whether you can go over to Chocó and you can find some people that still retain a lot of their African traditions from 300 and 400 years ago. And Francia Marquez is an activist from one of these communities. And but a lot of people chuckled because she did she was thrown into the spotlight and really had not been coached on public speaking at that level. I'm not saying that she couldn't do it. She had already, had won some awards, international awards, for the work that she had done on human rights. But anyway, so Petro picks her, and she actually turned out to be the intelligent, articulate one, while he's the one full of crazy talk. Petro's always saying crazy stuff. And she has, like his quantum physics deal, but she's actually turned out to be, not that you necessarily have to agree with her politics, but reasonable. She's come out publicly and said how she's disgusted with the corruption of the current administration, where she's still the vice president today. She and Petro have distanced themselves, and she's really disillusioned with the way that they have run things. But I'm not going to say a single bad word about Aida Quilque as a person. I don't know her. I don't know much about her. But the vice presidency as the potential replacement for a medically fragile president is an inarguable risk, and you would be foolish to pretend otherwise. So we have to bring that up. How much confidence do we have in the vice president for either candidate, right? Now, number 4, investor confidence. I just cannot imagine investor confidence domestically or internationally improving under a Cepeda presidency. The Petroleum Union has come out already, not surprisingly, to support Abelardo. FECODE, which is a big group of, it's like the Chamber of Commerce in the U.S. It's like a business advocacy group has come out in support of Abelardo. And I can tell you that, internationally, right now we're seeing an especially strong Colombian peso. And part of that is the U.S. dollar's general global weakness. But part of it, in my read, is the market reacting to Cepeda's opponents' strong polling. So the markets vote too, and they're nervous about the left. And because Abelardo came out surprisingly with the first place win in the first round of the election of the voting, that caused the peso to surge against the dollar. So the dollar fell against the peso, which is the same thing that you're talking about. And so that shows you where the opinions of, or what people are thinking around the world, those people who deal in pesos. Number 5, the father. And let me be fair about this one. You cannot reliably judge a son by his father. I'll tell you, my own dad, who I mentioned earlier, was a politician. But as an adult, I spent most of my life in the political party opposite to his. We had a great relationship. It was never a problem. I think he probably was amused by it. He thought it was funny. But we had vastly different political philosophies. So I'm not going to do the lazy thing and convict Iván Cepeda for his father's beliefs. But Cepeda actually does seem well aligned broadly with his father's ideas. His father was Secretary General of the Colombian Communist Party. Iván went to college in Soviet Bulgaria, and even though he says he became disillusioned with the hypocrisy of Soviet communism, he still seems committed to Marxism and a far left ideology. Now, if that's your cup of tea, great. Chalk it up to you as a plus then. I've just never been myself very fond of Marx or Engels or Lenin or Trotsky or Stalin or any of those guys, or Mao. Number 6, crop substitution. And this is, a thing that on paper, it sounds marvelous. And so the idea is that you go to the farmers that are growing dope, that are out there growing, mostly cocaine is the big issue, but marijuana actually still is a big crop, illicit crop in Colombia. And so you go to these farmers and you give them a talking to, and you say, look, we'll buy potatoes from you, or we'll buy corn or wheat, or it's too hot for wheat. You don't grow wheat down here, but whatever you're going to grow, hot peppers or bananas or coffee. Right. And then, okay, just don't grow this thing, grow that thing. Why would you spray coca bushes with the noxious herbicides that wreck the environment and people's health, and when you could just glyphosate? And that's been a big controversial thing for a long time. Do we spray with glyphosate? Do we not spray? Is it bad for the environment? Is it bad for human health? Is it going to make people sick? And glyphosate is Roundup. For those of you who are farmers or have a big yard or something, you might know what it is. Why not just offer farmers a legal alternative and a path out? And if it worked the way it's drawn up or the way I just described it, I would be on board 100%. And this is something I probably would have never learned until I actually lived in Colombia. The problem is the gap between what the brochure says and then what you see out there on the dirt road. So a lot of these people that grow coca, it's not that they're sitting around like, oh, let's be dope dealers, or let's be part of the dope chain, or let's get in on the dope game like the gangsters, would talk out in the hood somewhere. That's not what happens. Maybe they want to grow like bananas or potatoes or onions or whatever they want to grow. But what happens out there in these areas like Norte de Santander or down like by Pasto and these areas, Cauca, is that these bad guys, the ELN or FARC or maybe the AUC, I don't know as much about how they operate in this way, will go to the little farmer and say, you dig up all this onion crap, get this out of here. You will plant coca. Well, I don't want to. Well, you'll die. Okay. They force you to do it, and they force you to farm it. You don't have a choice in it. There ain't no 911 that you can call, or 123 like this number down here in Colombia, where the police are going to come and, hey, these people out here bothering me. and nobody's going to show up. You're screwed. Okay. So if you grow it, this is the crop you're going to grow. They're going to pay you what they want to pay you. You're going to do the backbreaking work of harvesting it as well. Okay. And you're going to lug these bags of stuff in. So you're kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like slavery. You're being forced to do it. They give you some money, but you don't have any choice in it. You grow this crop for them out in these areas like Catatumbo, or you die. Okay. So if you want to like get them to substitute crops, you first got to get police and military or whoever out there and get rid of these guerrillas who are forcing these farmers into this labor that they don't want to do. Maybe some of them want to do it. You can't get any kind of voluntary crop substitution until you first make it secure for them. Okay, you need the security first before you can then go do that. Now, when they come in here with like drones or crop dusters or however they spray, or sometimes like they send the military in there and just go chop it up, like the big army troops. I've seen this before where they just come in with machetes and they just kill all these coca plants. It's kind of like, I mean, it's complicated because it's not like, okay, well, this family now, compensate them, right? Or something. But what happens is that if the army comes in and does it, then they can say to the guerrillas, hey, we didn't do it. We had no say in it. You see, the army was in here yesterday and they did it. And so, you can't like blame us for it. And it kind of gives them a way, like an excuse, if you will. But my point is that it's a complicated situation. It's not a matter, these people are not always growing these crops because they want to. What I've learned being down here and spending some time out in these rural areas is that in many cases they're being forced to. And so just saying I'm going to have a voluntary program, hey, sign up for it. You can't. You're risking your life if you do that. They're making you grow it. So you've got to solve that problem. And that problem means you've got to go and confront and go to battle with these Segunda Marquetalias or ELNs and these different groups. So that's the problem there. Okay. Number 7, Cepeda is quite the statist. What I mean by that is he wants to expand the state's role in everything. For example, he would continue Petro's attempt to take over the health sector. And let me remind everybody, Colombia, before the pandemic, had one of the best reputations in the world for the quality of its health care. Is it very unequal? Yes. You're not going to get the same care in some isolated hamlet, vereda, like we call them in Colombia, that you get in Cali or Medellin. Hell, you won't get the same health care on the south side of Bogota that you get on the north side. But okay, then the government can go out there and build clinics and hospitals in the areas that are underserved. That's fine. You don't have to, there's no reason to take over the parts of the private system that are working in order to do that, unless you just ideologically object to the existence of doctors and dentists to small business people or to hospitals that don't depend on the government. That's ideology. That's not a health policy. So maybe you like that. I know there's people all over, single payer now. Yeah, we want the NHS. Okay, well, then maybe that's a positive for you. Okay. Number 8, Daniel Quintero. If Cepeda wins, he may well protect Daniel Quintero, the former mayor of Medellin, who's under indictment for over 40 counts of corruption. And Petro, again, they're all buddies there, just appointed Quintero to oversee the EPS system, which really galled a lot of paisas, the people in Medellin, where he kind of got literally run out of town and moved to Bogota. And he, Quintero said that his family couldn't walk down the street because he was so hated in Medellin. He ran his cousin-in-law, his wife's cousin, to like be the replacement mayoral candidate. And this poor guy, Upegui is his name. He got like the record low. He got like an outsider. He got 11. The votes were 70% to return Quintero's enemy, Federico Gutierrez, and 11% for Quintero's cousin. So they just got run out of town, or like we would say back in the States, that's when they get tarred and feathered. But I don't remember Cepeda ever saying anything directly supporting Quintero. But so this is somewhat speculative. But Quintero certainly is behind Cepeda and attached to that movement. And just got appointed into the current administration, into Petro's administration. And his fortunes are he's certainly going to fare better under Quintero than he would under a Abelardo de la Espriella government. So 9, again, maybe you like this, but Iván Cepeda is a former member of the Communist Youth. Now, if you're a communist, I suppose that's a plus. If you're not, it's downright scary. The FARC and the ELN are also communist groups. Is that where his apparent sympathy for them comes from? I mean, he sees himself as a human rights defender. How are you a human rights defender and member of the Communist Youth? But that's like, yeah, I like Lenin and Stalin, but I'm down with, yeah. He said, okay, yeah, I went over to Bulgaria and then I came back and I didn't like the Soviet way the Soviet did them, whatever, but okay, fine. So what, you like, I don't know, Castro's way of doing it and Chavez's way of doing it? He stays conspicuously silent on the abuses of the Chavista regime right over in Venezuela. You know, Hugo Chavez and Chavistas and Maduro, these guys. And again, going back to La Silla Vacía, the reporting documented this in detail. Cepeda has spent something like a decade avoiding criticism of Maduro's repression, his fraudulent elections, his alliances with Colombian guerrillas. Cepeda has a record of noticing human rights violations in places he doesn't like, the United States, or committed by the bad guys he doesn't like, the Paracos, the paramilitaries, the state, the Colombian government, while he exempts the bad guys he does like, if they happen to be communist or socialist. And I mean, the record's pretty clear on this. He's outspoken advocate, peace advocate, and victims' rights, but he's silent on all the victims. You know, how we feel like 2.5 million Venezuelans, refugees in Colombia right now, who had to flee their country, not because they wanted to, but because of political repression and because they are literally starving. OK, so that's the Cepeda ledger. And I'll be honest, for me, that con column or communist column is pretty heavy. So where does that leave us? 2 men. One built his life on being seen, a brilliant theatrical defense lawyer for the powerful and the accused, who is now promising an iron fist and surrounding himself with at least one genuinely serious technocrat in Jose Manuel Restrepo, vice presidential candidate. The other built his life on a single tragedy, a disciplined, consistent, ideologically committed man of the left who has fought for victims for 30 years, and who also has a real blind spot the size of a guerrilla encampment. The paradox that I cannot get past: the tough on crime candidate has spent his career defending the criminals, and the human rights candidate stays silent on half of the human rights abuses in his own backyard. Each one is, in some way, the thing he claims to be against. I'm genuinely uneasy as an analyst, as an observer, about both of these candidacies, but for vastly different reasons. This is not a runoff between an angel and a devil. It's a runoff between 2 men who each ask you to trust that their inconvenient friendships were strictly professional. So I'm doing what I said I would do. I'm laying it out and handing it to you. Now here's where you come in. Tell me where I got it wrong. I'm sure you have some opinions. Did I go too easy on one of them? Did I go too hard on the other one? Did I miss something on the HEP, the Jurisdicción Especial de Paz, or on the crop substitution, or on the security situation? I genuinely want to hear it. I learn from you. Drop it in the comments, whether you're on YouTube or podcast. If you're on our podcast, you can't really comment if you're driving or something, but go to our social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and tell me where I'm right or wrong. And one more thing. Aside from the usual like and subscribe is like a parrot, right? Which tells the platform that you want more of this, I'm asking you not to trust the algorithm. some ornery politician, Abelardo, who has a notoriously thin skin when it comes to any kind of criticism or investigative digging, or Cepeda himself, who was a member of the Communist Youth, Uribe or Petro or Trump or Xi Jinping might get annoyed and pull some strings to get us deplatformed. You've seen it happen. Some YouTuber or podcaster or influencer or whatever you want to call it that you like and that you follow just disappears. What happened to them? You don't see their stuff anymore. Hey, how come I stopped getting this guy in my feed? Or she, what happened to her channel? So beyond the like and subscribe on YouTube or social media, please subscribe to our newsletter. The link is in the description. I'll never share your email. We've been in business for over a decade. We never have and never will. So for Finance Colombia, just go to fcsubscribe.com. That's the letter fcsubscribe.com. Read the full written analysis. Get our English language Colombia business news. No fluff, no lifestyle, no tourism. Just the stuff that matters if you have investments, ties, or operations in Colombia. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a 5-star review genuinely helps spread the word. Share it with a friend who's trying to make sense of this election. I'm Lauren Moss, and we'll be back before Sunday. But until then, be kind, be safe, and stay smart.